Yes, indeed. Ding, ding, ding. Albie isn't here, so it's not us for the Saturday Scrap tonight. But we're going to be debating a polling card in Tower Hamlets. It's been sent out and it's not written in English. So, folks, I'm asking the question tonight. Should you have to be able to read English to be able to vote in an election that will, of course, alter the nation's destiny? Well, Benjamin Butterworth and Dr. Renee are going to go head-to-head. Dr. Renee, I believe you've been tasked with starting us off. So, ding, ding, round one.
So I find this really interesting because I grew up and went to school in Newham, which speaks 114 languages. And my next-door neighbours were a Muslim family who adopted me as their honorary daughter because they had 5 boys. And the mother of the family, Zora, could not speak English, very little. And her husband, who was a very educated man, he was a lecturer in the local college, told us quite proudly that he would instruct her how to vote at the general election when he walked with her down to the polling station. So I would say that if we're having to send out polling cards in other languages, there is no way that these people who cannot speak English or read it can partake in the political debate. How do they actually listen to the debates? How do they read the newspapers? How do they read the leaflets that come through the door, telling them what each individual candidate stands for? I think it should be a requirement for people to read English to actually be here in the first place. I see so many patients who've been here for 20 years who do not speak a word of English. It is actually isolating. It does not allow integration. And the problem that we have is that we actually have silos of women living in communities where they don't need to speak English. And that actually for them keeps them completely isolated. Many of them are depressed, and we see this day to day in my work. I think it should be absolutely essential for people to speak English, and therefore, in order to vote, you should be able to speak and read English too.
Well, Renee didn't hold back. Benjamin Butterworth, what are your thoughts?
Well, there can be no doubt that being able to speak the language of the country you live in this one, clearly English, is highly desirable. It makes life much easier. It means that you can access education and workplace and socialise. And I've campaigned in Tower Hamlets and been amazed by the fact that many women, mainly women, can't speak English. I've also campaigned for Hillary Clinton in 2016 in Florida, and was struck by the fact that I had to learn to ask their vote in Spanish because they didn't speak English. But does that mean that somebody who is otherwise eligible for a vote because they have citizenship, or, for example, they're from a Commonwealth country so they get it automatically, should they be denied the vote because of what is essentially an academic qualification, a marker of intelligence? Well, no, I think that would be wrong. The idea that you start saying that because somebody doesn't have a certain qualification, they shouldn't get the vote is deeply problematic. And, of course, what is it that we make the marker of who gets the vote for? Well, it's if you are a citizen and if you are affected by what the state is doing to you. Someone who, for example, lives in Tower Hamlets or Newham, as Dr. Renee mentioned, and doesn't speak English, is probably has a bigger effect of what the state does and the government's decisions than many other people, because if they're poor, if they're more vulnerable, it will have a big impact on their lives, and yet you're taking away their access to the vote. But let's add this. If it's the case, as Dr. Renee put out, that because you can't read the newspapers or watch the television to take in the different arguments being put forward, well, there are people with disabilities that would not be able to do that in the way that any of us are used to. So are you saying, Dr. Renee, that someone who doesn't have the cognitive abilities or is maybe deaf and blind should be barred from voting?
Well, of course I'm not saying
But that is what you're saying, really, isn't it?
No,
because you're saying if they can't understand the arguments, they don't get the right.
No, I'm not saying that at all, because somebody who's deaf and blind will actually have other ways of having things translated for them and put into the language that they can understand in terms of Braille, or actually having hearing aids to actually allow them to hear. It doesn't say that they can't speak English because they're deaf or blind.
So hang on, by that same measure, the people you described can speak to their community and they can have extensive discussions in a different language about the political arguments.
But the worry
is that not the same? They still have a means to the information.
It's not the same, because people who are deaf and blind still speak English. They just have to hear it in a slightly different way, perhaps, or read it in a slightly different way.
And people that don't speak English can ask their husband, their friends, their community leaders.
That's a very interesting point, because I think lots of these people mean, because of that language barrier and asking their community leaders, they are being guided who to vote for, Benjamin. They're not being given all of the arguments so that they can make their mind up themselves.
I mean, this does assume that we're thinking about probably people from Muslim countries and those issues that, lots of women, as you say, that don't have the same access. But, there are lots of people that speak lots of languages, and it's strange that I suspect if you told the Brits that have gone and retired in Spain, look, they ain't learning Spanish, they can't speak a word of it, people that have lived there for decades, do you really think you'd say you could justify to those English people that they shouldn't be allowed the rights of becoming a Spanish citizen if they've gone and retired there because they don't speak Spanish?
I would say the same. As you know, I go to Spain a lot, and I'm trying desperately hard to learn Spanish because I think it's something that I should have to do.
So you think there should be academic qualifications that decide whether you get the...
It's not an academic conversation, speaking the language of the people around you.
It clearly is a level of qualification, right? It's a skill, it's a learned fact. So someone who wouldn't be able to learn the language should be barred from voting, despite the fact that the state has said they've met all the expectations to be a citizen.
It isn't an academic qualification.
But you're
saying
there should be two levels of citizenship, and you should be able to take the vote away. How much English should they speak, for example? Will you sit there? How would you even implement this? Would everybody, before they go to the polling booth, have to do a test of their language skills?
I actually think everybody, to actually get citizenship, should have to pass a basic English test.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll just bring it out to the panel now. Thank you very much for that. But that surely should be a necessary prerequisite to actually being able to come to the country. Of course, you should speak the lingo. And by the way, I agree with what Renee said. What the Spanish do with their own requirements, that's up to them. It's got nothing to do with us.
The bar of whether you get a vote is whether you've been granted citizenship, or, as I say, come from certain countries that get it automatically. I'm sorry, but I find it absolutely absurd that someone like Matthew, who is not a British citizen, who is Australian, gets the vote in this country.
It's me. I'm the problem. It's me.
Exactly. I think that is a much bigger threat and problem than people
say,
that don't have fluent English.
Oh, well, hang on.
So the historical reason why Commonwealth citizens vote, of course, is because there were, in the not-too-distant past, there was a single British Empire, and Australian citizenship was considered to be the same thing as British citizenship, and it's a hangover.
But we don't get the vote in Australia, do we?
No, you don't. And, I think it would be completely acceptable to take away the citizenship from Commonwealth citizens. But I think on this broader point, though, I think I do agree with you, Benjamin. And the reason for that is that there is a history of using literacy tests in order to disenfranchise voters, and that's, of course, the Jim Crow laws in the United States. They used these tests against African Americans, and the concern is once you start creating a test, it can be used arbitrarily against different people, different sets, and you can't implement something in a fair and reasonable way.
Okay.
And I would also have one other thought, which is technology is solving this problem anyway. The latest version of ChatGPT can basically translate in real time a conversation. You can use Google Translate for text. If you want to be an engaged citizen, you can do it even if you don't speak English as a first language.
Well, I don't know what that's going to do for siloed communities that we've got in this country. But Leo, I wonder, do you think Benjamin's been a bit of a hypocrite? Because, of course, he doggedly supports the Labour Party, who want to give all EU citizens the vote to actually ensure that they can gerrymander the election.
Well, of course they do. And there's a reason Joe Biden in America is happy to have 9 million, plus illegal migrants, voting as well, because these people, of course, are going to go for the leftist vote. And also, you're talking about citizenship. I don't think you should have citizenship or be rewarded with citizenship if you can't speak the language. Why should you?
Well, I'm not saying, at no point did I say that you shouldn't be expected to learn the language, that it isn't desirable. It makes a massive impact on the quality of life. What I'm saying is that if you qualify for a vote, you shouldn't have it withdrawn because of a certain skill set.
Well, I'm saying there shouldn't be just an expectation that you learn English as part of your citizenship. I'm saying if you can't speak English, you shouldn't be awarded citizenship.
There are a lot of English people that go around the world to move to other countries, never learn the language.
That's their problem.
I wouldn't expect to go to Japan and be awarded citizenship just because I've lived there for 3 years.
And you wouldn't be. Japan have much stricter immigration
in order to
rules
become a
than we
citizen, you do actually have to learn English. You have to do a living in the UK test. You have to actually learn about British history and culture. In fact, I have to do that test this year in order to stay in the UK.
You're going to fail.
I don't know why you want to stay here anyway. I'd be straight off to Australia.
We can swap citizenships if you like.
Well. There are lots of Brits going to Australia. Still